Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I think we're ready to start our panel on the role of banks in providing access to finance for business, particularly for small and medium-sized businesses. My name is Charlotte Ruhe. I'm the Director of Small Business Support at the European Bank for Reconstruction and Development, and I'd like to introduce our impressive panel today. Our rapporteur immediately to my right is Mr. Dimitris Dimitriadis of the National Confederation of Hellenic Commerce and a member of the EESC. We're very pleased to have with us Mr. Otar Danelia, Minister of Agriculture of Georgia. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Minister. Mr. Mārtiņš Bičevskis, President of the Latvian Association of Commercial Banks. Mr. Heinz Olbers, Director, Eastern Neighbours and Central Asia Department at the European Investment Bank. Francis Malige, Managing Director for Eastern Europe and the Caucasus at the EBRD. Gerhard Schumann-HITZLER, Director for the Neighbourhood East in the Directorate General European Neighbourhood Policy and Enlargement Negotiations, DG NEAR, of the European Commission. And Mr. Oleksii Miroshnychenko, Executive Vice President of the Federation of Employers of Ukraine. So, our first question today, which I will ask each of the panelists to address, is about access to finance, which is essential for enterprise growth, whether startups or well-established enterprises. Excuse me. I'd like to ask the panel members to address what do you see as the main challenges in the Eastern Partnership countries, and how can we, the IFIs, the European Commission, the organizations serving business in the region, work together to address them? Please, Mr. Minister, if you would like to speak first.
Good afternoon. It's a real pleasure. Thank you very much. And it's very nice to have such a chance of discussion and interaction. First of all, when we are talking of finances for business, probably agriculture is not the first one on the list. I mean, this is something that is always full of challenges. This is something that is not really always attractive for financing and banking sector. Therefore, I think this is something that I will be concentrating on, and if you allow me, I will just highlight the main challenges we are facing. But before that, I would like to highlight that we've signed the association agreement last year, and since then we have already increased in trade with the European countries more than 20%, and that's already something. The figure is promising, and it tells us that it needs additional intervention, support, and we have to do something about it. At the same time, considering the Georgian agriculture, I will only compare the figures of financing the sector and before it was financed. It was 59 million Georgian lari in 2011, that is the agriculture financing portfolio, which now exceeds 800 million within 2.5 years' time. So that's what we are talking about when we are talking of financing. And of course, one of the main challenges is the interest rate, because in our case, of course, we cannot compare with some other developed countries in terms of interest rates. Therefore, it still remains to be quite high and not very suitable for agriculture financing. And therefore, I think this opportunity of cooperating with the EIB is very essential in our case. And it gives more opportunities, it gives much more competitiveness to the sector and to the farmers in general. And of course, we will probably have later on more opportunities to discuss about the other challenges in the field, in the agriculture sector itself, as we've turned from post-Soviet into European standards, and that is another exercise and homework we are now applying. So this is something I would say that is crucial, very important, and practically it's important to develop sector without appropriate financial intervention and support from the banking sector. Thank you very much.
Hello, it's a real pleasure and an honor to be here in this distinguished panel. I guess for each country which is trying to develop their economy, right now, not the access to the finance is most biggest challenge. I think the question is whether the business which is with proper risk, which could be financed, and whether there is business which could show their future sustainable revenues sustainable market where it could work. And that's why, from our experience, I guess most important is to have necessary reforms in the country, reliable justice system, clear bankruptcy procedures, well understand business environment. I guess those are very, very important details which could be improved in each country, and then this finance possibilities would be more wider for each country business. Another challenge for the all of societies which are trying to improve their economies, I guess, is knowledge of the business people and experience. And I think all programs which support possibilities to increase knowledge of the business people, of the labor force, whether to import those people, whether to create programs for giving knowledge them, those are really, really important in particular those times when changes are so fast in all kind of business types. So I guess those are most important things from my perspective.
Okay, thank you, and let me try to build the bridge a little bit. First of all, I fully agree it is not only about access to finance. What we are talking about is, as we have, the three countries have signed the association agreements, is how to successfully compete in this new market and how to prepare for that. And indeed, reforms business environment in the countries, that is very important. However, what we found out in studies we did together, in particular with the Commission, was that access to finance is a problem, so we also have to tackle that. And what we identified is three areas where we should look at. The one is, and just come back to what the Minister said, is the high interest rates in the region. They are extremely high if you compare with the EU. Second is certainly the collateral requirements that cannot be met by all the businesses. And the third element I would, when it comes to finance, is certainly that only short-term money is available, whereas if you invest long-term, you should be able to raise long-term money. So looking at that, I think the main challenges that I see and what we have to address and what we try to address is, first of all, lower the interest rates. There we certainly make recourse to our AAA funding and try to pass on these interest rates to the final beneficiaries. Second is collateral. I think we have to find models to share risk. That is to have less security requirements from the individual final beneficiary, but also encourage the banks to do more in the market. And thirdly, I think when it comes to literacy, provide technical assistance to help, for example, preparation of business plans. So help again the final beneficiaries, the SMEs, but, and for this region I think also very valuable, help the banks to do that. And that can be done, I think, but that is for later, in cooperation with Commission, with the IFIs on the place, but that's for the next round, I think. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I can only share what the colleagues have said. Access to finance is a problem in this region of the Eastern Partnership. This is a region where we've been active for more than 20 years. We've invested 18 billion, a bit more than 18 billion euros across about 1,000 projects. And access to finance is not just a problem for SMEs, it's also a problem for mid-caps and some corporates as well. And when the question is about the role of banks in providing access to finance, I think it's a central role. It's not the only provider of finance, but you need strong banks because they are the bulk of the channel for now to provide access to finance to all the clients. As these countries develop, we see that capital markets, for example, develop. We've issued the first ever Larry bond of an Armenian dram bond of EBRD last year in these two countries. But this is, for many companies in that region, still a kind of a distant dream. Also, one thing to keep in mind, I would like to say, in that region is that the banking systems are very, very different. So the role that banks can play in a country where the banking system is well organized, it's largely private, is well supervised, like Georgia, is very different from the roles that banks can play in countries like where the banking system is completely broken, taken over by organized crime, and so on and so forth, as we sadly have seen as well in this region. The second, I think, important thing when we talk about access to finance is that I meet SME owners all the time. And those in Azerbaijan that pay 15% find that the interest rate is too high. And those in Tunisia that pay 2% find that the interest rate is too high. And I'm sure if I met some that pay 0%, they would still find that it's a pain that they need to pay back the money, right? So they're always going to complain. But our experience is that the only sustainable interest rate is an interest rate which is market-based and based on sound macroeconomic policies of the country where these companies operate. In other words, if you don't build the proper macroeconomic environment for companies to be able to thrive, yeah, you can throw some, cheap funding at them, but it's never going to be sustainable. And that's what we saw in Turkey, for example. SME lending really took off when the government took the right decisions so that the interest rates went down from 30% a month to 3% a year. And then suddenly you see economic activity take up. Because we as EBRD, we're a big institution, right? Our balance sheet is 40 or 50 billion. It's tiny. So there's only so much money we can put in a country, and we use it to set an example with our clients rather than to try and change the balance from a macroeconomic standpoint. Now, the last idea I would see around access to finance is that it's a two-way street. They say it takes two to tango. It's not just the bank that gives access to finance. It's not a right access to finance. It has to be deserved, and the way you deserve it is with a good business plan, sound processes, and also, frankly, in a good business environment. Because in an environment where collateral is easy to get to and easy to recuperate if you have to, then banks are going to lend much more. And that's why we have developed programs together with the EU and also together with the EIB to provide advice as well as finance. And to blend it, when we blend it with grants, for example, that the EU gives us, we manage to package products where the client not only gets funding, but they also get some advice to learn how to adapt themselves to the DCFTA requirements. Exporting to the EU is a different game than exporting to Russia. The standards are different, the network of distribution are different, and so on and so forth. So this is a learning curve for some of these countries, and we're trying to play a central role in that prospect, in that project of anchoring these countries more into the large EU markets through combining investment grants, finance, and as well as technical advice. And so we're quite happy with the results, I must say, when we see entrepreneurs. There's hundreds, thousands of entrepreneurs that we've helped in those various countries. And when we see that after having helped them, they get easier access to finance, they learn how to do it, they learn how to get it, and then we can step out of the game and we can let them live their happy life, and that's when we are happiest. Thank you.
Good afternoon to you. I think you have already got an impression that we are not only sharing out the time to fill, but that we are combining our views and the different types of support that we can make available. And just to recall, access to finance is extremely important, but access to finance is determined by many different factors. First of all, there needs to be capital available. Now, there's a lot of capital around the globe, but will it go to the countries we are concerned with? Secondly, we need to have a functioning banking sector in order to make sure that the money will be channeled to the companies. And thirdly, the companies need to be creditworthy. They need to have the appropriate attraction, the guarantees, but most importantly, to have a sound business plan, and they need to have a sound perspective, because money needs to be earned and to be returned to those who lend. Now this against the background in all of the countries which are in a transition. They are in a transition towards a more market-driven economy at different pace with different levels of ambition, but they are all in transition. What is important in such countries and societies and economies in transition is to create level playing fields, to end state monopolies and oligarchic structures, to introduce fair rules and ensure that the rules are respected by everybody, and that you can ask for help if somebody does not play according to the rules. And we need to have transparency and oversight. We need to have an appropriate system of checks and balances. Now, this requires fundamental changes. And we had the recent experience of the countries that joined the European Union in 2004. We have representatives here, and they can tell us more about how they experienced this process of transition. But just to give you a short list of areas where we in the Commission feel that changes, fundamental changes, are inevitable and need to be there. It's reforms in the decision-making process, in the legislative process. It's reforms of the judiciary in the public administration, already referred to. Fight against corruption and organized crime. Introduce sound and sustainable public financial management. To have reforms in the banking sector in order to have a transparent and reliable banking sector, which is really the key condition for handing out money then to the SMEs or the businesses. We need to have more predictability and stability in the banking sector. We need to have independence and professionalization of banking supervision and regulatory authorities, so that we have a sound environment equally for handing out loans to the businesses. And on the side of the businesses, we need to have the necessary reforms on accounting and auditing, creating there equally trust through transparency. So there equally needs to be an adaptation to European or worldwide standards. To resume it, it means that we need to create a favorable environment first for companies to flourish and to be able to take up the capital or the loans, the finance, in order to work with that money. And that means that in all of the countries we need to make sure that we lift obstacles and cut red tape, not only in the European Union, but equally in these countries. Obstacles are way too high. We need to make sure that we can unleash the potential which is there in the companies. We need to have a good and reliable and credible strategy in the countries that will lead to sustainable growth. We need to have, for instance, what we would call smart specialization, and then the rest will follow. And access to finance is just one of the elements which will then make sure that we can continue with this motion once we have started it. For that, we need all to work together, all of the partners, and you have already seen different dimensions of the same problem, because we come from a different end and we have different contributions to make. But if we join all of our know-how, of our firepower, of our possibilities, I think we can build something very strong and solid there, which covers the entire range, that is to be resumed perhaps in 3 words: reforms, money, and advice. And I would use the example of it. This is what is known to all of the farmers. You need to have the soil, you need to have the seed, and you need to have the water. And that's what we try to achieve. Thank you.
Good image.
I would like to speak Russian.
I would like to speak Russian. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Speaking about challenges for the Ukrainian business, I would separate it in 2 big parts. The first part is availability or accessibility of finances, and second is accessibility to the markets of consumption. So for us, I would speak more about the banking system of Ukraine. As of today, there are 148 banks in Ukraine whose assets are about $70 billion. Think about these digits. This is first thing. Secondly, Ukrainian business is deprived of the access to the inexpensive money. The interest rate of the National Bank of Ukraine is 30%. These are huge figures. When you speak about 2%, 15%, we have 30%. Expectation of the population, generally on the national currency, 24% per annum. That's the rate for the deposit rates. For the legal entities, 10, 12, 13%. During the recent year and a half, national currency lost its value by 3 times due to devaluation. And the inflation we had is 60%. Therefore, when the colleagues say that we need business plan, we can have wonderful business plans, we can have everything, but you do not have a possibility to have long-term and inexpensive money. Therefore, the first conclusion is, without stabilization of the national banking system, we cannot talk about serious and sustainable development of Ukrainian business. Therefore, I think that the assistance of the European Union is especially important for us. Our banking system must be transparent. We need professionals, about which we spoke, and then we can talk about further development of entrepreneurial environment, because big companies have certain possibilities of getting access to credit resources, but small and medium-sized enterprises do not have such access. So we have to develop small and medium-sized enterprises, stabilize national banking system. This is a question number 1 for Ukraine. Thank you.
Very interesting initial statements from our panel. I'd like to actually come back to Gerhard about the deep and comprehensive free trade area, because of course with the association agreements and the DCFTA, a lot of the points that you raised about transparency, about good public administration, the banking sector independence, some of these things are not touched on in there, but many of them are, and it would be helpful if you'd tell us a bit about what the Commission is going to be doing to help the countries to adopt the standards required by the DCFTA.
Thank you. Well, there is not one single action or one single agreement that would bring about the fundamental changes I was talking about. There are different elements which need to come together. The Deep and Comprehensive Free Trade Area Agreement sets out in more detail where the legislation and the national standards need to be aligned on EU standards, which very often are close to world standards. But this is only part of ensuring that we will have this level playing field between the EU and the 3 countries having signed that agreement, because that opens the free access to the European market with more than 500 million consumers. So you need to be compliant with your offer in order to be able to enter that market. But this is more the technical side to it. There is a second layer of installing the necessary level playing field and having the creating the necessary confidence for investors, which are the more fundamental reforms. And they are part of the policy dialogue that we have with the countries, and they are rather part of the association agreement globally, or how we try to move forward the reforms in the country. We try to be helpful there as well, but it's a complement to the DCFTA agreement. So both need to come together so that the perspectives and the opportunities that are created for the businesses can really be used, and that the companies can seize these opportunities. What we try to do at the level of the companies is then to reach out to them, to enable them to see where the opportunities are and to make the best out of it, inter alia through channeling financial support, but equally making sure that the necessary advice, business advice, support, information is handed over to the companies as well. Thank you.
Heinz, you mentioned that the EIB will help companies with their business planning and also bring cheap finance. Do you want to say a bit more about your specific plans vis-a-vis DCFTA?
Yep, thank you. First of all, I have to say, when it comes to the DCFTA facility, I would really like to stress the very close coordination and cooperation that was initiated by the Commission to come to a common reply, comprehensive reply, where we build on the strengths of each of the institutions involved. So that was a very good exercise, first of all. Secondly, indeed, as I mentioned earlier, we see our strengths in providing long-term money at very attractive interest rates. And with the DCFTA facility, I think we can complement this with additional elements that are very much needed in the market. The first is certainly to move down. We talk about SMEs, and SMEs is, I would say, a backbone of an economy. But what we also target in the future, more than we did in the past, is the micro enterprises, so the very, very small ones. So that is one of the areas that we can target in the future more than we did in the past. The second is certainly to help on the other obstacles, for example, collateral requirements. So we will be able in the future to help on that, so that less collateral is required to be provided by the SMEs when they ask for finance at their banks. There we can consider, for example, guarantee solutions on a case-by-case basis. The third area is, there is also talk about guarantees, but that is really guarantees for entire portfolios. So, and that plays together with the right analysis of the situation of the banking system and of their preparedness to do new business. So the way there is to provide portfolio guarantees to banks, so take a risk out of the balance sheet, that not only allows them to do business with SMEs, but you would oblige them to do so, and that again at attractive interest rates. For this we take recourse to the expertise of the European Investment Fund. That is a subsidiary of the EIB. It's the largest provider of portfolio guarantees in the European Union. So we use this expertise to have this also now available in the Eastern Partnership countries, or in the countries that have signed the association agreement. And then, as an additional measure, what was also mentioned by several of the speakers is to provide support to the SMEs when it comes to preparing business plans, when it comes to establish sound accounting principles, because as Mr. Schumann-HITZLER mentioned earlier, transparency, that of course is not only important on state level, but also when it comes to the SMEs themselves. Thank you.
Our rapporteur would just like to make a small intervention.
Yes, first of all, thank you very much. A very short intervention, and I apologize because I have 8-hour flights after that, and I have immediately to leave. But I will be on the other side, and sorry about that, I will be a little bit provocative. I am in the market about 40 years, and I represent the SMEs, the micro world, and this world is totally unknown in the European Union and in Brussels. And I have the great honor to be member of the European Economic and Social Committee more than 20 years. I made a lot of reports about the SMEs, about the micro companies, about their problems, and I have before me the president of the ECO section, Mr. Just van Iersel. We work together in Europe. I strongly believe that in Brussels we are very far away from the SMEs. We made a lot of reports, we made a lot of opinions, we made a lot of documents. We write 100,000 papers, but the reality is very far away. We have millions of SMEs in Europe which they have no idea what are the European programs, what is the European Investment Bank, what is the European Investment Fund. They have a lot of problems with the intermediaries bank between the programs in the countries, in the local states. They have a lot of problems with the interest rates. Please don't look at me, a Greek, because the interest rate in my country now it is 14%. Forget it. Let's see the European scheme. But this is the reality. Do we have, the question is, do we have a good business environment in Europe? Forget my country. The answer is no, with capital letters. We don't have good business environment in Europe. And we don't support SMEs in reality. Of course, there are a lot of measures. There are a lot of money. But why the European Union has failed all these 20 years to spend this money? Why? Why a lot of hundreds of thousands of SMEs didn't touch the European monies? No answer in Brussels. They try, of course. Bureaucracy. We use a lot of times transparency. Of course, I respect transparency a lot. But what kind of transparency? For SMEs only or and in the banking sector? How is the behavior of the banking sector to the SMEs? Can we understand the differences between Latvia, Bulgaria, Greece and Portugal? Now we are working together in our committee to find the real problem, the practical problems for the SMEs.
Thank you, Mr. Dimitriadis. I think you've raised some points that obviously resonate with the audience. Francis.
I just wanted to come back with an example, actually, because we talk about SMEs as a population, but I just want to give you a nice story, because it is, but it is also true. Last week, with Gerhard, we signed a contract with an SME in Georgia, and that is an impossible client. So the way it worked is the government of Georgia had committed to move to digital TV in the country. And we, together with the government, established proper procedures so that there would actually be a proper tender as to who was going to be in charge of switching the TV in Georgia to digital. It's very important because, it's a lot of people get their news from TV in Georgia. Then, it's not yet a country where everybody's on Facebook and so on and so forth. And instead of giving it to a friend of a friend, the contract was awarded through a proper tender process to a small company based in Georgia. And then it turned out that financing for that company was going to be difficult because it is a fledgling company, because it's been in business for a while, but the banks were not necessarily entirely comfortable and so on and so forth. And we looked at it, and our credit people were not happy with us. And so we went to the EU, and we agreed with the EU that the EU was going to provide us with a small amount of money that provides us with a risk sharing, so that we got comfortable with the client, the bank's client got comfortable with the client's bank got comfortable with the client, and in the end, last week, we signed with this client a contract where they get a loan from their bank, we take half of the risk from that loan, and that loan is underwritten by some money from the EU to make everybody more comfortable with the risk. It's hard work. It's hard to do with hundreds of thousands of companies. We provided also advice to that company, by the way. But this is how we work with SMEs across our region of operations. So it can be done. It's difficult work, but it can be done.
Well, thank you, Francis. I think that's a really nice example. We've had quite a few comments about the need for transparency, the need to reduce corruption, and while this wasn't planned, I'd like to ask the minister representing the government of Georgia more broadly. Georgia really showed that corruption is not cultural, it can be dealt with, and it's a matter of policy. Could you perhaps just say a few words about the steps taken in Georgia to improve the business environment?
Thank you very much. Very good question, and I would like to thank Francis also. It was a very good example, and I think it's a clear example about, and it's a pity our colleague has left, because I think it would have been a very interesting discussion, because there are certain things that is up to the private sector, and there should be initiatives coming from there, and then of course there is the government, there are financial institutions and so on. There are resources, they are available, and they have to do whatever is required to fulfill the requirements and get the financing. In terms of corruption, yes, it's not a Georgian disease, it's not a Soviet disease. This is something that could be cured, and we've showed it to the rest of the world. And we are ranking 11th in the world in terms of low corruption, 15th in terms of making business. So this is what we have achieved, and believe me, it's not difficult. It's not hard at all. It's just the willingness. It's just the policy that has to be defined, and everybody has to very strictly follow all these policies, and it improves the situation. Like, it was a very good example that it was a tender, and tender is becoming everyday practice, and not only the state sector, but also private sector is moving to the tenders because they see the benefit of it. So it has nothing to do with the corruption. We are looking at the saving some money, making better quality, giving opportunity to the private business, and at the end of the day, they pay the price in terms of supporting the government back. So this is a process. It's a healthy process. It's acceptable for everyone, and then we see the benefit finally. So, I mean, if you look at the Georgian state budget, it has increased almost 100 times since 90s, and that was only done purely phasing out corruption in the country. And that is the real result. And of course, development of private sector, banking sector, I mean everything. If we don't kill corruption, if we don't fight corruption, we cannot talk of success stories, unfortunately, that's for sure. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Minister. Mr. Bičevskis, it would be really good to hear a bit about Latvia's experience in dealing with some of the problems we've discussed here today and the challenges facing the countries going ahead with the association agreements. Could you comment a bit from the perspective here?
Thank you. Of course, if you look back in situation with Latvia, then 10 years and 15 years ago, we had totally different environment in Europe. We had totally different expectations how this part of the world could grow, how fast the growth could be. And we also had very, very fast integration of financial sector between Baltic and Scandinavian markets, and that gave us a huge access to the finance. But in the same time, I think most important lesson what we can have from that time is that all the time we have to keep balance between growth of productivity and balance between tax policy, which should always support investment in productive sector, which always should support investment in those areas where export possibilities could be found. And when we see Baltic and Latvia history, we see that we got the biggest bubble in real estate area, and that was because of not very quite right tax policy, which allowed investment flows in particular this non-productive sector. So another issue which I would like to raise is I think that was a very good point which Franz mentioned about this risk sharing for SMEs, because especially during last couple of years when we implemented a huge banking reform, which increase a lot all of requirements for the banking safety, and which would not allow to the taxpayers pay more money for banking problems, then we see that somehow if we want to support SMEs, we should share some risks with banks to allow them take those higher risks, not to go inside the risk with their capital requirements. So I guess also this lesson is very, very important. And finally, I would say very clear and good state financial support system should be implemented in each country. It should be centralized, well coordinated, and this system should give necessary advice together with private sector, with banks, to improve potential of all small business people to get necessary knowledge, have to get this finance, have to improve their business. So I guess those would be most important lessons from our history.
Oh, thank you. You've mentioned some really important factors there. Actually, Gerhard, maybe you'd like to come back on the points raised by Mr. Dimitriadis, because I think Mr. Bičevskis has put his finger on the business associations, the support environment created by the state. I know the Commission is very active in capacity building also in the region and working with the associations of this nature. Would you like to come in on that?
Thank you. Yes, my immediate reaction was by saying, okay, you can look at things from different perspectives. And if I compared it with the situation you ask, the 500 million European citizens, do you know enough about the European Union? The very broad majority will say, no. Then you ask the second question, and when did you try to get some information about the EU last time? Said never. To get information and to get access is equally a duty for those who can benefit from the information. We cannot reach out to each and every company. But of course we take into account the needs and the requests and the complaints from SMEs. And colleagues of mine working in another Director General of the Commission do nothing else but that, trying to reach out. Reach out not on a one-to-one basis, but mainly through the associations. But what is very important is that we involve in our work, for instance, chambers of commerce. And they are the best ones to establish the first links. They are the best ones to provide sound advice. Peer-to-peer learning is a very, very efficient instrument. And of course, we can always do better. But we discussed it between us, three partners around the table here, that of course, when we talk, for instance, about support that can be provided to SMEs in the context of the deep and comprehensive free trade area arrangements, that we need to make sure that there is sufficient information easily accessible. There are a couple of good examples of websites, but if you look a little bit around, and if you go, for instance, in the countries to the website of the EU delegation in each of these countries, if you go to the websites of EIB, EBRD, you will find links. Of course, sometimes it will take a while to navigate through. But we are constantly working on improving access to information. There are some leaflets around at the desk, just in the main lobby, for instance, which equally holds information. So information can be obtained, but of course we would equally expect that those who are really interested, that they go for and look actively for the information. What we try to do on our side is, for instance, to enable banks as intermediaries to share that kind of information and to pass it on as well. And some are better prepared than others. But this is a constant work, but it needs to go equally, or it needs to be actively looked for as well. And then I would not agree with the findings of Mr. Dimitriadis that we haven't done, or we were not successful in supporting SMEs in the European Union. The SMEs in the European Union are by far the best driver for growth. We have some 24, 25 million SMEs in the European Union. Of course, they have not flourished just because of the European Union. But I think they have equally flourished and are successful because there is support by the policy, the EU policy, laws and regulations, but equally through the financial help, and in particular the EIB has a very high proportion of its money that can be handed out, which goes to the sector of SMEs. The EBRD is doing a lot in terms of business advice, turning around companies or demonstrating to them where they might have better opportunities there. Of course, all three of us are confronted with the fact that we could do much more if we had more money and more people. But we don't want to create there a big monstrum as well. And to underline it, we can be helpful. We are the oil in the machinery, but we should not be seen as the only machinery and that we need to provide solutions. This is the big advantage of SMEs, that they are creative, that they come up with ideas, that they explore ways of doing it without waiting to be told what to do. We don't want to have an economy where Brussels decides where to invest and how much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gerhard. I think we have some time for questions from the audience. Please raise your hand and identify yourself. We'll bring the microphone. Is there another microphone? Maybe not.
Thank you very much. I would like to handle the question of access to finance in a broader sense than only concerning banks. I have a question concerning IT finance platforms. My name is Schreuder. I'm a member of the European Economic and Social Committee from the Netherlands. And what you see nowadays in some countries like Germany, the UK, Hong Kong, the Middle Eastern countries, that there are IT financing platforms coming up, which are the intermediary between the lenders, including banks, and also cross-border bank activities, and the SMEs on the other side. And in the Plan Juncker to support SMEs in the EU, there's also an initiative of, I think, of 1 billion to stimulate the IT financing platforms. So my question would be, considering the 6 Eastern European Partnership countries, are there initiatives to stimulate and using these IT financing platforms? And I refer therefore to the Commission and the EIB and the EBRD. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, if modern technology can help making life easier for businesses or for the administration, we are clearly in favor of doing it. But there needs to be certain preconditions in place. Modern IT systems you will find, for instance, in the Baltic states as part of their transformation process, and that is what confers them a certain advantage over neighboring countries. So this is best practice. And what we would recommend from the Commission side is that countries try to team up, and we repeat it over and over again. The best thing is to team up, to join forces with one of the countries having gone through a very rapid and successful transformation process in the recent past. And for that particular instance, we would recommend to team up with the appropriate institutions in the Baltic states. Now, what we try to do, and we have recently signed an agreement on it, is to improve the quality of high-speed connections in the Eastern Partnership countries. In order to have the backbone, in order to have the technical means of using such platforms. But there, once again, we can be enablers, but we cannot ask the companies to benefit from it. That there are certain downsides to IT platforms in money terms is a different subject, but Heinz Olbers is probably better placed to see to which extent we have already started investing in that area.
Perhaps, first of all, it's absolutely right. When we look at access to finance, finance for SMEs, we have to follow the technological process and progress. So what was valid 5 years ago and the instruments we used and the way we were looking at how to provide financing are no more valid today. And they will have changed tomorrow again. And just to give you an example, when I talked earlier about the portfolio guarantees, there's a huge IT requirement behind that, because just to analyze a portfolio consistent of hundreds or thousands of SMEs, you need very strong IT support, methodologies, etc. We are looking actively at the moment, but that is now for the southern neighborhood, not for the eastern, but at the end of the day we go in parallel with both neighborhoods, of course, in alternative solutions for banking, which will be new areas for the EIB. I cannot tell you anything about the outcome. I just tell you we are looking at mobile banking, we are looking at crowdfinancing, and crowdfinancing by definition needs these platforms, and this is also about alternative access to finance, alternative to bank finance. We are looking into that, so I think we are aware of the challenges. I cannot give you a reply right now to tell you yes, and as from September is Platform X, but we are actively looking into this topic and with a particular focus on the neighborhood.
If I may, I'm sorry to be raining a bit on that parade, but technology is very good, but in a loan, granting the loan is the easiest thing to do. The hardest thing to do is to monitor the company once you've granted the loan, and the hardest thing to do is to get the money back if the company fails to pay. For that, you don't need computers. You need people. You need people that understand their clients. You need people that work with them on a day-to-day basis. You need bankers that know where the company is, which is the tractor that they financed. You need bankers that come back to the office in the evening with dust on their shoes because they've actually gone and talked to their clients. And that, if it's about improving the technology that banks use, then yes, probably short term. But if it's about peer-to-peer lending and all the rest of it, in the business environment that we currently have in our countries in the eastern neighborhood, that's science fiction. I'm sorry.
Yes, I think there was a couple of very important points. First of all, we in Baltic see this as potentially additional source of capital, and it's good that we have new technological instruments for creating such opportunities for small and medium businesses. But I fully agree that we have to go forward step by step to improve knowledge about how to lend and how to spend this money properly. Because on the one hand we will have potential capital from people who would like to invest with higher interest rates, and from another point of view we would like to not create system which allows to lose them this money in a couple of years very fast. So my point is that this is good opportunity to be as additional source of capital, because in our European banking-driven economies, always we have to combine banking, finance with your own or other source of capital to share this risk. But in the same time, we have to go forward step by step. And finally, it's good that we have this future opportunity because in not very big economies, as Baltic economies are, or whether those are most of Eastern Partnership countries, capital market will not be a solution, especially for SMEs, so in nearest 5 years. So my point is that it's good to have in the future other source of capital, but we have to implement this step by step.
Excellent. Now we actually are running out of time, and I have to ask each of our panel members, you only have half a minute each, but what is your top priority to strengthen the Eastern Partnership for business in the years ahead? Please, Mr. Minister.
Our priorities, I think we have to talk around the financing again, and I think it was perfectly well. I mean, I agree with actually all the panel members, and we are discussing the same issue from different views, of course. In our case, yes, it is a proper business project that has to be prepared, and of course, if it will be cooperation between the two entities in the two different countries would be perfect. PPP could be a very good option in this case when we are talking of co-financing in general. And of course, maybe looking at the cheaper funds. And also in the countries like Georgia, for instance, where we have local currency plus we have US dollar and we have euro, I think it is extremely important that the access to those funds are according to the requirements of the private sector. Like if someone has a business with US dollar based countries, they could apply for US loans, US dollar loans, for the ones with the European Union, of course, in euros, and for the local activities, I think national currency in the long term would be very appropriate. So that's, I think, where I would find the, let's say, one glance global solution. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Please.
I think that risk-sharing programs in each country which would allow to the banking sector take the risk in cooperation with SMEs, those are most crucial programs right now, particularly in this time when interest rates are so high in those economies.
Okay, I think first, of course, implement the new products we have available thanks to the DCFTA facility, so to roll out, but that is products. In terms of approach, I think what we will particularly focus on in the future is what we call the value chain approach, so covering not only the individual SME case by case, but to develop solutions from education through production, through storage, quality control, to marketing, successful marketing, for example, in the European Union, also other markets. So to develop a complete value chain approach. We have done that in Moldova very successfully, and we are now about to roll this out in other countries who have signed the association agreement, including today with Georgia.
I think one of the things which would help business in this part of the world is to focus very much on investment by the private sector. And keep in mind the sentence that was said once by the US President, the scariest sentence in the English language is, it probably meant the American language then, but is, I'm from the government and I'm here to help. So let's remember that governments build the playing field, and we should make the playing field as easy as possible for players to play on it. It means fixing the banking systems, creating a good business environment for people to be able to invest, an investment climate. And then we can do lots of wonderful things with private sector investors to create growth, to create jobs, and push these countries forward.
I would go in the same direction. Priority should be to make a country attractive for private investors and private capital. And for that, it needs reforms, 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 and in particular in the banking sector.
Ну, я только могу сказать.
I would like to say from the point of view of Ukraine what we have to do. Firstly, to solve the situation on the east of Ukraine with the military conflict. Without solving this issue, we cannot have serious changes for stabilization of banking system. Secondly, to do our home task, which we set ourselves by signing an agreement with the European Union. This is our home task, and therefore we have to do it ourselves. And then, thirdly, to start working with corruption, fighting with corruption. This is another problem which we have, which is huge in Ukraine. And the fourth is to start real reforms. If we do them, Ukraine will be a prosperous country. Thank you.
Round of applause for our panel. Thank you all very much.